Hello everyone, today we are on our second lesson of our Holocaust unit, and this lesson is all about identity. It's all about the way that Germans saw themselves, the way Nazis saw themselves, and the way that these groups saw other people within their own country. And our learning objective today is to be able to answer, did differences in identities cause the Holocaust? Now we have two images. On our left, we have an image translated into English. It says the eternal Jew. And on the right-hand side, it says the German student fights for Hitler and his nation. And there are a few things that we can pick out from these two identities that will really lead us into the lesson today. If we start off on the left-hand side, we can see the eternal Jew. He's holding some money in his hand, and he's holding it out as though to offer it to someone, perhaps as a loan. And on the right-hand side, we have a picture of Germany, and this is the hammer and sickle. This is a symbol of communism, something that Germans really didn't like. And we can also see a whip in the Jew's hand. Now, what this poster is suggesting is that Jewish people are money lenders. They're going to lend out money to Germans during the Great Depression. In doing so, they will beat the Germans economically, and they will turn their country into a communist state. On the right-hand side, we see an image of a very young man. Notably, he has blonde hair. Difficult to see, but we can assume his eyes are probably blue. He's wearing a brown shirt and a black tie and holding a swastika flag, so we know that he's part of the Hitler Youth. And his identity is very different to that of the eternal Jew we see on the left. Our German on the right-hand side is very proud, he's very patriotic, and he's going to help Germany become great. And on the left-hand side, we have an individual who is going to potentially destroy the country. So as we move forward, let's keep in mind these two identities, and let's also remember that both of these posters are examples of Nazi propaganda. So the Nazis wanted to portray themselves as patriotic, as very helpful to their country, and to paint Jews in a very negative light. We've got two key words that we need to look at. The first is genocide. It's not a word that maybe we're all familiar with, but genocide is an intentional action to destroy an entire group of people. Now, this could be an ethnic group, a national group, a racial group, religious group, in whole or in part. Now, genocides are something we most often associate with the Holocaust, but they have taken place at other points in human history. In the not so distant past, there was a genocide in Rwanda. There was a significant portion of people in Bangladesh who were being persecuted by their government in 2016, 2017 as well. These things do happen, and groups of people based on the color of their skin, their race, or their religion may be targeted by other groups. This feeds into identity. This is who you are and what makes you different, what makes you similar, and what connects you to others. Now, I've spoken before about Facing History and Ourselves. This is the organization that's helped us develop these lessons. Originally, we worked with a man named Michael McIntyre from Facing History, and he had a quote that he said that really stuck with us at Pressix. He said, "Genocide happens when there is only one identity, and that identity is wrong." We need to think about your identity. And in doing so, we're going to try to look within ourselves quite deeply about who we really are. So, step one is to think about your identity and the qualities that make you unique. Step two is to choose two of the most important aspects of your identity and think about why those are very important to you. And the last step is to think about what would happen if your important identities were under threat. So my example is I'm a man, I'm a teacher, I'm very active, and I like to think that I am fair. And my most two important, I'm going to say, are going to be being active and being fair. So being active is really important to me because I want to be healthy. And I know that if I keep in shape, I eat well, I'll live a longer and hopefully a healthier life. Being fair is really important to me because I always want my friends to know that I will treat them with respect and I'll be honest with them. If there was a situation where active people were being treated unfairly because they were active, or people who were fair were going to be treated unfairly because of the fact they were fair, I'd be in a lot of trouble because those two parts of my identity are very important to me. Now, I could become unactive and become unfair to try to keep myself safe, or I could keep these parts of my identity and potentially get myself into some trouble. What you should do now is consider pausing the video and just take a moment to really think about your identity and who you are. And what would happen if parts of your identity were under threat? Would you give them up or would you keep them and try not to get yourself into trouble? So we need a little bit of context for religious and racial identity. Now, the Nazis had a really strong view about race and religion. They believed that Germans were superior to all other groups, and that's all other countries, all other religions, and all other skin colors. Jews were known as what was called the Untermensch, and this is a German word. Unter means below, and Mensch means human, so this translates into the subhumans. Jews were seen as a whole other race. They weren't part of the human race. They were animals. They were vermin. They weren't equal to Germans in any way. Now, the Nazis believed that for Germany to become successful again, all other groups must leave. These groups included Jews, Gypsies, Poles, homosexuals, and the disabled. And the Germans' rationale for this was Jewish people, Gypsies, Poles, all these individuals were taking land, homes, and jobs that could otherwise be given to Germans. Now, if these groups didn't leave Germany on their own, the Nazis would have to take action and either force them to leave or to eliminate them.
Once upon a time, in fact it was on a Tuesday, the bear saw that it was time to go into a cave and hibernate, and that was just what he did. Not long afterward, in fact it was on a Wednesday, lots of workers arrived near that cave. While the bear slept, they built a great, huge factory. As winter turned to spring, the bear awoke and stepped out of his cave. His eyes popped. Where was the forest? Where was the grass? Where were the trees? Where were the flowers? What had happened? "I must be dreaming," he said. "Of course I'm dreaming." But it wasn't a dream. It was real. Just then, the foreman came out of the factory. "Hey, you! Get back to work," he said. The bear replied, "I don't work here. I'm a bear." The foreman laughed. "That's a fine excuse for a man to keep from doing any work, saying he's a bear." The bear said, "But I am a bear." The foreman stopped laughing. He was very mad. "Don't try to fool me," he said. "You're not a bear. You're a silly man who needs a shave and wears a fur coat. I'm going to take you to the general manager." The general manager also insisted the bear was a silly man who needs a shave and wears a fur coat. The bear said, "No, you're mistaken. I am a bear." The general manager was very mad too. The bear said, "I'm sorry to hear you say that. You see, I am a bear." The third vice president was even madder. The second vice president was more than mad or madder. He was furious. The first vice president yelled in rage. He said, "You're not a bear. You're a silly man who needs a shave and wears a fur coat. I'm going to take you to the president." The bear pleaded, "This is a dreadful error, you know, because ever since I can remember, I've always been a bear." And that's exactly what the bear told the president. "Thank you for telling me," the president said. "You can't be a bear. Bears are only in a zoo or a circus. They're never inside a factory, and that's where you are, inside a factory. So how can you be a bear?" The bear said, "But I am a bear." The president said, "Not only are you a silly man who needs a shave and wears a fur coat, but you are also very stubborn. So I'm going to prove it to you once and for all that you are not a bear." The bear said, "But I am a bear." The president packed his vice presidents and the bear into a car and they drove to the zoo. Bears at the zoo said the bear was not a bear because if he were a bear, he would be inside a cage. The bear said, "But I am a bear." So they all left the zoo and they drove to the nearest circus. "Is he a bear?" the president asked the circus bears. The bear said no. If he were a bear, he would be wearing a little hat with a striped ribbon, holding onto a balloon and riding a bicycle. The bear said, "But I am a bear." When the president and his vice presidents returned to the factory, they put the bear to work on a big machine with lots of other men. The bear worked on the big machine for many, many months. After a long, long time, the factory closed and all the workers went away. The bear was the last one left. And as he left the shut-down factory, he saw geese flying south and leaves falling from the trees. Winter was coming, he thought. It was time to hibernate. He found a cave and was about to enter when he stopped. "I can't go in a cave. I'm not a bear. I'm a silly man who needs a shave and wears a fur coat." As the days grew colder and the snow fell, the bear sat shivering with cold. I wish I were a bear," he thought. Then suddenly he got up, walked through the deep snow toward the cave. Inside it was cozy and snug. The icy wind and the cold, cold snow couldn't reach him there. He felt warm all over. He sank down on a bed of pine boughs, and soon he was happily asleep and dreaming sweet dreams, just like all bears do when they hibernate. So even though the foreman and the general manager and the third vice president and the second vice president and the first vice president and the president and the zoo bears and the circus bears had said he was a silly man who needed a shave and wore a fur coat, I don't think he really believed it. Do you? No, indeed, he knew he wasn't a silly man, and he wasn't a silly bear either. This excerpt comes from Facing History and Ourselves, Holocaust and Human Behavior. For more information on this resource and our organization, please visit our website, facinghistory.org, or find us on Facebook.
So having watched the video about the bear that wasn't, we're just going to have a quick recap about what happened to him in the story. So as it starts off, the bear, he wakes up and he's suddenly in a factory, and he tries to explain to the foreman, the first vice president, the second vice president, the third vice president, and the president who he was. He tries to share his identity, but none of these men are willing to listen to him. They looked at the bear and they decided what his identity was going to be. They decided that he was a silly man who needed a shave and was wearing a fur coat. Now, to try to prove their point, they brought him down to the zoo and to the circus. And the bear was not accepted by any other bears at the zoo or at the circus because he didn't have the same caged or circus identity as them. And these bears are saying, well, you don't look like me because if you did, you'd be in the cage with me. And the circus bear said the same thing. You'd be riding a bicycle and you would have a striped hat. But the bear's identity changed when he began working on the big machine. He then convinced himself that he wasn't a bear, but he started to agree with the foreman that he was just a silly man who needs a shave and wears a fur coat. And when the factory shut down and winter came, the bear was a bit lost. He didn't really know who he was, and he said, I really wish that I was a bear so that I'd know what to do in this situation. But when he saw the cave and wandered inside and laid down, he then remembered that he is the only one who knows his true identity. And when he entered the cave, he knew who he really was. Now, this story is a bit of a metaphor. And in this case, the bear is going to resemble Jews during the Holocaust. And the foreman, the vice president, and the president, they're going to be essentially people within the Nazi Party who were taught a specific identity. And they weren't willing to change their view. They were taught that anyone who's in the factory is going to be a man, and they weren't willing to accept anything other than what they were being told. Now, the zoo bears, who in this case could be Jews as well, they weren't willing to associate with the free bear for any reason. Now, this could be because they were trying to help him. They were trying to keep him free to say, if we tell on you and say that you're a bear, you're going to get locked up with us, and that's a bad thing. They might have been angry that he was free, and therefore they weren't going to help him by confirming that he was a bear. Now, many Jews began to believe the identity that was created for them by the Nazis, and some accepted that they were in fact Untermensch, and that would be exemplified by the bear willingly working on the machine with the other men. He's now accepted his new identity. However, many Jews were unwilling to accept this, and they decided to fight back within the Jewish resistance against the Nazis in whichever way they could. So the Jewish identity in Nazi Germany. So much like the bear, Jews in Nazi Germany did not have the correct identity, and the Nazis viewed them as strictly inferior. Now, in 1935, the Nazis made something called the Nuremberg Laws, and these were made to persecute Jews. So these laws did a few things. The first thing is they took away basic human and legal rights from Jews. They stopped Jews from being able to marry anyone who was German. They took away their citizenship rights, especially even if they were born in Germany. They took away property, and they forced Jews to carry an identity document with them at all times. Later on, in 1938, 1939, this would change to where Jews had to wear a Star of David on their clothing at all times to, again, show their identity to others. These measures were designed to share that identity and to remind Germans and Jews that they were different. The rest of the time, for the next 40 minutes or so, you should be considering working on your Holocaust project. We have a few examples here of some work that students have completed. They've made diary entries, they've made sculptures, they've made books, they've made works of art. You should be communicating with your teacher to make sure that they are aware of the project that you are completing. If you haven't already done so, please send your teacher an email with the ideas that you have. And as always, make sure you go into Show My Homework, check for a quiz, and make sure you complete any other tasks set by your teacher.